This is Art364, Part 6, the High Renaissance. In the 1500s, there was an artist named Vasari, Giorgio Vasari, from Arezzo. And he was generally a mediocre artist, but he was a great historian. He wrote a book called The Lives of the Artists. And it was the first of its kind. He was like the first art historian. And he created this thesis within his book where he painted a picture of the way the world has gone up to his time. That is, in the distant past, there was the wonderful antiquity, the Roman Empire, and the Greeks before them. And they did great art back then. And that after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was a kind of a degrading of art. And that occurred for some centuries until Giotto came along. And he saw Giotto as the beginning of a trend away from that period of degradation, which he would think of, he referred to as the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, and a resurrection of the qualities that made up the antiquity. That picture of history is one that it persists, and it's why that the way it goes, the way the story goes within the Renaissance is that beginning with Giotto was the first to come out of that the old medieval style and bring back the kind of things from the antiquity, the art from the antiquity, and he brought it back in such a way that it continued to grow, and over the course of the two centuries, 1300s and the 1400s, it grew, and artists became more and more aware of exactly how to do art well, and they got better and better and better at it until they got to the very highest point around 1500, between 1500 and say 1520, is the highest part, where we have Leonardo and Raphael and Michelangelo. And Michelangelo, in Vasari's opinion, was as good as you can get. And that's why we call this period the High Renaissance, because of a perceived quality that it has in relationship to the art before it. And from our point of view, it's, there's some things to be said about this, but there's other ways to look at things. The quality that we see when we look at the history of art are not necessarily those that Vasari saw, and that there are things that are different priorities that people have when they look at art to see what is better than another. But it can be said that certainly the change in Italian art from Giotto to Michelangelo was one where artists became more aware of how to render figures and space, compared to the Middle Ages, which weren't interested so much in rendering the figure at all, as in any kind of naturalistic way, or space at all in any kind of naturalistic measured way. But the interest in those two things was profound in Florence in particular, and the artists competed with one another over the course of generations until they got to Michelangelo, where all of the things that had been learned before were embodied in one person, or three if you think of Leonardo, Raphael, and Michelangelo as co-equals in this. We're first going to look at Leonardo, and the image that we're seeing here is called the Vitruvian Man, one of the most famous drawings in the world. It represents a human figure inside a square and a circle, and what he's doing is illustrating a commentary from a book by Vitruvius, a Roman architect whose treatise on architecture, called the 10 Books of Architecture, was the only treatise of its kind on art of any kind that was survived through the Middle Ages from the time of the Romans. And because it was the only one, they read it very seriously in the Renaissance as their only source for things like what's good about art, what makes a work of art good, what makes architecture good, how do you design. And one of the passages has to do with how the relationship between the human figure as a measuring device in relationship to squares and circles, and that using the square and the circle as your primary design elements is a good thing, because as a human being, you fit within a square and a circle in the manner that you see in this diagram. Uh, he says that if your arm span and your height are equal to each other in the same way that the height and the width of a square are equal. Also, if you lie on the ground and your navel becomes the center of a compass point, making a circle which would touch your outstretched arms and your feet. And Leonardo has illustrated this, and he's also illustrated the other parts of the same passage where he talks about the dividing the figure into ratios, where one measure, say the length of the hand, or the length of the height of the head, or just the face from the hairline to the chin, or other measures are used as modules, and those would evenly measure throughout the body. But the reason this was something that needed to be illustrated, according to Leonardo's theory, is that he's looking for some sort of measure, some sort of way that you can make perfection by applying proportions and ratios and how geometry works and relates to design, because he was all about investigating just the primary, I guess, the principles of nature, the principles of design. And this is a particularly interesting passage in that it contains both Leonardo's take on it and Vitruvius's take on it, and it's sort of like the Renaissance's opinion of what was Roman and how to improve upon that, which is one of the things that the artists and the architects of the Renaissance wanted to do, not only bring back Roman things, but to improve upon them. So let's look at the first painting here, the Mona Lisa. Again, one of the most famous things in the world. This is a painting that, part of his fame comes from the fact that it was stolen in the early 20th century, and it was a big news thing, and everybody attention was on it. But it's many remarkable things about this picture. One, that in the history of portrait making, before this was made, portraits were very linear. Oftentimes they were the profiles of people's faces. They were, they were different. They were much more primitive. And when you get to this stage and you see that the Mona Lisa, as if it were the first time you ever saw it, it would look so strange compared to all the ones that led up to this. And when you look at this in relationship to all the portraits that have been painted since then, you see that all subsequent portraits take this one into account. Even today, I mentioned in class, if you have your portrait made at a photography studio, they will pose you in a pose similar to this, because this has become the definition of what a portrait is. This is originally, when Leonardo was commissioned to paint this, a man wanted him to paint a picture of his wife, and he painted it, but for whatever reason, we don't know, it was never delivered. And Leonardo kept the picture for the rest of his life, and kept painting on it and adding layers and layers and layers of glaze, making it much more mysterious and shimmering, something you can't see in a reproduction like this. And also because of its age, it has lots of crackerel. We can take a zoom in on its surface, the painting, it has all these little cracks in it, and it hasn't been cleaned. And I imagine that they're probably afraid to clean it because it's too valuable to risk. But it's a very different thing than what we've seen before. If you just look at the hands, the subtlety of the modeling is greater than anything that you would have seen in any other picture leading up to this. It's just tremendously subtle. The range of tones that occur between one part of the hand and another. It's the opposite of what we were seeing before with Botticelli and the linear quality, putting a line around something and filling it in with a tone. This is something different entirely. You can imagine this is just it is so soft, and that it's just a quality that you just can't, I don't know, can't put into words. At least I can't at the moment. But it's very very subtle, and the term for this in Italian is smoky or sfumato, just a subtle changes in tone. Another thing that it has that is a kind of a new thing is it's kind of hard to see in this reproduction, but it's the edges are all soft, and many of them blend into the darkness around it, also adding to the mystery of it. You can see like all of this in here is lost, and all of this in here just sort of blends into the darkness, so that the figure blends into the background, and that's an interesting way to resolve this problem of the figure and the ground, is to have the figure sort of blend in gradually to the ground. When we compare this to, say, the work of the northern artists, they also have some darkness in the background. They also have some very detailed, very photographic looking images of people, but there's nothing there in the northern artists that are like this. This is a world apart in terms of its quality. The image is just so real and striking, but at the same time has a kind of a perfection to it that takes into account both the northern surface quality desire and the Italian interest in structure, and the underlying structure of things, and the positions of things being just right. Probably a good idea to do some research on it, to look at all the things that have been read, because there's it being the most famous picture in the world, everybody, all the art historians throughout the ages have talked about it, and talked about all the features, the landscape, the primeval looking landscape, its smoky distance, it blends into the background in such a way that it's very unlike anything we've seen in Florentine art. I mean, where everything is sharp and clear all the way back to the back. Here he's making everything mysterious and smoky, and things blending naturally from one thing to another. He studied painting, and he was going to write a treatise on it, and he has voluminous notes where he talks about all sorts of aspects of painting, and his things like he would put cheesecloth over the windows to soften the light that lands on things, so there's no harsh shadows or harsh contrast between light and dark. Anyway, so that's his portrait painting, and we also have on your list the Last Supper. Probably maybe the second most famous picture ever painted. This has an interesting history in that it's a ruinous state now. Originally, it was painted. It's on a wall in Milan, in the refectory, or the dining hall of a monastery, Santa Maria della Grazie. And he was working for the Duke of Milan, and who was a patron of this monastery, and he was given this commission to do a fresco The fresco, as we've seen before, is done very quickly. You put it on the wall with wet plaster, and you have to paint while the plaster is wet, which was very unlike what Leonardo would normally do in his design process. He kind of invented a process where he would try lots of different compositional studies in drawings before he came to the finished picture. He would try everything. If you look at imagery, say if he's going to do a Madonna and Child, he would do hundreds of little sketches, making the figures in every conceivable way, poses and angles and sizes and relationship between figure and one figure and another, to explore lots of different possibilities before he settles on one to be the painting. And once he gets to the painting stage, there's still any number of opportunities for change and changing colors and positions and doing all sorts of stuff. So he rarely ever finished anything because he was always wanting to change it, wanting to improve it and perfect it. So normal fresco would not be for him. So in this case, he decided to invent a new form of painting, or a new technique, a new medium that involved other things besides wet plaster, where he would paint directly onto the surface in such a way that he could change things. He was like painting oil, perhaps, or tempera, or some other mixtures of chemicals of his own invention to try to get something that he could change it as much as he wanted to, and still have the colors as bright as he wanted to, and have freedom to do his style, to his using his technique. But it was a disaster, because even before it was finished, it started to crack and flake, and it didn't work. And over a very short period of time, it was deteriorated to the point where you could see it. And the fact that we can see at least this much is a wonder. I think we can look at some places. I'm sorry, look at some places like here, where James here is almost all of the paint has flaked off here. Much of the paint is flaked off over here. There's very little left. So a lot of the faces are just ghosts of their original selves. But years and years and years of artists trying to restore it and put paint back on it so you can see what the image was like had to be removed. Like just recently, in the last 20, 30 years, they spent a lot of time taking everything off that wasn't by Leonardo. So that's the state that we're looking at it in, is after having been cleaned and everything removed. So this is what we have left, and it's a remarkable image already. Even under this condition, but when it was first made, it was like it was one of the wonders of the world. Artists would come from all over to study it and copy it and just marvel at it as being something that was far and above anything that anyone had ever made before. When we look at the composition, let's look at one aspect of it here is just the linear part of the composition. It is what we're seeing is a table parallel to the picture plane, and there are all the figures that are the disciples with Christ in the center on the other side of the table. They're in a room that is presumably an extension of the room that we're in. That is, this is in a dining hall, though it's high up above the floor, so it's not like you would have your eye at the level of the vanishing point, which is around here, to see the picture, so that it does extend the room out. It's not an illusion in any way. From corner, it's a 1x2 rectangle, so there's a square on one side and a square on the other. It has a diagonal line representing the tops of some tapestries that are on the wall. It's hard to even tell what they are, but originally, I guess, these were tapestries at the top edge, and it points directly to Christ's face on both of these. And other lines, for example, there's some you can hardly even see down here on the floor, also go to Christ's face, and they line up to the edge of Christ here to create an equilateral triangle right here in the center. And pointing at Christ's face, being in the center of a picture, we've seen that before. by Masaccio, and other artists have done the same thing. It is using the system of perspective as a geometrical device, not so much to give the illusion that something is far away, but something is on the surface, that is pointing at something on the surface. Um, Again, the point that I made in previous pictures that the Florentine artists did, especially the ones who were really good at perspective, were using it to counter that aspect of perspective, the illusion aspect of it. Another thing they were doing was or in this case, to have something in the background that is geometric, so as to bring it forward. Geometric things being parallel to the format lines, is like the format, so it looks like it's on the surface, and so something that's very far away is brought back up to the front. Also, the greatest value contrast, the lightest thing, is also something that comes back to the front, because it feels like it's on the surface, that his head is right there in the same place as this surface is, as opposed to something that is miles and miles away. So that's another way, is to make this a much shallower looking picture than that might be implied by these rafters or whatever they are going back into space. There's also character studies going on here. There's lots of figures doing interesting things around here, and it is though he understands the psychology of human beings and the variety of reactions. What's going on is that Christ has just said, "One of you will betray me," which is something that occurred at the Last Supper, and they're all responding to that, and they're arguing with one another using gestures, the way Italians use hand gestures and when they talk, and so you can look at what their expressions on their faces and their body language and their hands, to see what they're thinking, and that these are not just pictures of people; they are images where you can see, like, inside a person's thought through their body language, which is one of the things that Leonardo was going beyond other artists in doing. He wasn't just looking at the surfaces and looking at how well you can do a figure, but to look at almost like the soul of a figure and see what they're thinking. So he has all of that, and he groups them all. There's groups of 3 here, and 3 here, and 3 here, and 3 here, and he puts them all on a line so that they all are sort of composed together within this knot of things, all as a frieze across the space, with a kind of parentheses on either end. We've seen that before too. I think Van der Weyden did that with a group of people to sort of give a kind of a electrical charge, put some energy to compress them all into this shallow space. Lots and lots of remarkable things about the picture, but I think you get the point. Let's move on to Raphael, another high Renaissance artist. And when you look at this is a Madonna and Child, and we've seen a number of versions of Madonna and Child up to this point, and looking at this and relating to the others, you can see that Vasari is right. I mean, there is a definite progress in terms of naturalism and just general quality. This just seems much more breathtaking comparing this to, say, Masaccio or Giotto or Cimabue, or any of the others that came before. This is an image of a Madonna and Child where we have only the slightest, here as you can see, slightest indication of the fact that it's the Madonna and not just any girl with a baby. I mean, there's just the extremely skinny line to indicate the halo, or the halos here. It looks like much more like a real human being, though it is idealized. It's an idealized version. It's as if it's a realistic image. If the ideal woman really existed in the real world, it is a realistic depiction of that. It has he is not Leonardo, so he doesn't have all of the qualities that the Mona Lisa has. But uh, uh, the Mona Lisa is a one of a kind thing, and Raphael turned these out, by the dozen. Um, he was much more commercial. He he got to see the Mona Lisa when it was new, and he made his own version of a Mona Lisa. He was very much influenced by Leonardo, but he was also influenced by his teacher Perugino. And there's a look of Perugino about everything in here. It's that brightness of everything. You can see everything clearly. The distant landscape is clear and bright, and it's kind of a Perugino looking landscape in the background. Uh, you know, and he's from Leonardo he gets a lot of this subtle modeling, but and also the face is kind of a Leonardo sort of face, except that it's um, sweeter, it's more sentimental compared to Leonardo. I think we can zoom in a little more. You can see lots of the little details that he puts in, tiny little gold threads and embroideries or whatever this is going around. There's a beautiful paintwork there. But if you look at this compared to the Mona Lisa hands, there's you can tell who's better. Um, that's just you know that's just the way it is. Um, the next work by Raphael is his masterpiece. This is in the Vatican, in the rooms just off of the Sistine Chapel. We'll see the Sistine Chapel shortly, and it was painted at the same time that Michelangelo was in the other room painting the Sistine Chapel. This is in the Pope's private apartments. Is the rooms were like his offices, and he has these big elaborate rooms with lots of decorations in them. And Raphael and his team did this fresco called the School of Athens, and the other parts of this room have other big arched pictures that have to do with Greek mythology and things that are lofty intellectual exercises. But in this one, what we're looking at is a big open space, big architectural space, similar to uh, the St. Peter's that is being built at the time that this is being painted, and it is in pretty much this state. They have some of the big barrel vaults already made, and they know that there's going to be a dome up there. This sequence of arches are all kind of things that are actually out there nearby where the painting is being painted. We'll see that St. Peter's in a moment, but it's so he's created this world, what's called the antique world, more Roman than Greek. But there's all the Greek philosophers here with their students in a frieze across the the space, similar to what his teacher Perugino did in the Delivery of the Keys. It's a similar sort of picture, though it doesn't have nearly as much open space as that one did. Lots of the same sorts of figures, big idealized, um, Greco-Roman looking figures standing with contrapposto everywhere, and lots of drapery and stuff. In the middle is Plato and Aristotle, and they're the main dichotomy between the different Greek thoughts. The Plato is more interested in heavenly spiritual things, and Aristotle's more interested in the earth. So he's sort of pointing down towards the normal world that we live in, I suppose the ideal world that the Platonic folks like, and I think they're each holding their books. I think the Timaeus and the Ethics. And they're standing in this arched way, nicely framed in this arched way, and that archway is in another archway, and that has another archway. And this sequence of arches within arches going back into space, but easy, sort of being parallel to one another, nested, I guess you could say, in one another, is something that Ghirlandaio did earlier. So the influence on Raphael was from everybody. In fact, one can think of him as being kind of a synthesizer, someone who takes little bits of different bits from each artist and makes his own version of things. There's lots of people in here that are recognizable. I think this is Socrates over here, and let's see. I think this is Euclid doing some sort of some geometry back here. Ptolemy is back here. There's Raphael himself in the corner there, standing next to an image of Perugino, his teacher. The different thinkers of, antique thinkers, with their attributes to show, who they are and what they do. But it's also, has portraits in it. This is, in addition to being Euclid, I believe this is Bramante, the architect, who we'll see shortly, using a compass here to teach all these people about geometry. And other ones, I think this must be Pythagoras over here, or somebody with a bunch of students all writing down. And being the school of Athens, this is just about all of that classical thought. And this figure here is a figure, I don't forget which Greek, which philosopher it was, maybe it was Herodotus or somebody, but the figure that he used as the model is Michelangelo himself. And this was added later. This is the original drawing for this, has everything in this picture that you see except this figure. This was added because Raphael wanted to put Michelangelo into the picture. So, and Michelangelo was in the next room painting, and apparently that's what he looks like. He's a big, muscular guy. Does sculpture. So he's one who works with his hands. But also he's a contrarian. Look, notice that he's leaning up, he's brooding, and which is one of the features of Michelangelo as well. That he broods and he kind of discontent most of the time, and he's out of skew with the rest of everybody. He's not looking at everybody. He's not talking to anybody, and he's sort of writing down something. But the little piece of marble that he's leaning against is out of skew with the rest of everything is perfectly symmetrical. Also, is an indication that this is the character of Michelangelo sort of being summed up in this image. And the next work we're going to look at is, in fact, Michelangelo. He began as a sculptor, and he insisted throughout most of his life that he was a sculptor. He wasn't a painter, though he was apprenticed to Ghirlandaio, who we saw before, when he was young. But he also he worked he was given a place to live by the Medici, and he got to study their collection of marbles, and ancient marbles that they had there, and so he became a sculptor. But later in his life, he was given this commission to do the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and the Pope who commissioned it just demanded it of him that he paint this. And for whatever reason, Michelangelo didn't want to do it, and he tried to get out of it, but the Pope insisted, and I guess the Pope gets what he wants, and so he painted it. We are going to look at one section of it, but you see right now it's a big barrel vault, or it's not a semicircle. It's a shallow curve from here to here, and then it's cut by these little triangular things that come through where the windows are. But otherwise, it's a relatively smooth surface. And what he's done is created a frame for everything by having this illusionistic architectural thing going in and out, like an architrave with pedestals, I guess you could say, or the architrave comes in and out so as to make these different settings so that he can have several pictures. And the pictures look like pictures that would be on the wall except they've been raised up to the ceiling. They don't look like you're illusionistically looking up into the sky, which is something that later artists in the Baroque, that we will see, will do that as a way of making it look as though when you're looking up at a ceiling, you're looking up into the sky, and that the things that are in the sky are things you're looking from underneath at. This is not the case, except with respect to the fictive architecture and the fictive figures that are on the architecture that are kind of like sculpted figures, but they're painted to look like real figures. So they're called the inudi. I mean, they're all nude male figures that are on pedestals, and they're all in a variety of poses. You can see some of them here. Complex poses where they have twisting arms going in all different directions, and they're just like framing devices to add to the the composition of all these things. But they add to all these things to create frames to put the imagery. The imagery are the stories from Genesis on this end, which is done last, is the separation of light and dark, and the creation of the sun and the moon, the creation of Adam here, the creation of Eve, the expulsion from the garden, the I think the drunkenness of Noah, I think is one, and Noah's flood, so the Genesis stories are being told, and also there's other frames down here. Down this part of there's other figures like prophets and prophetesses or sibyls, alternating the men from the Bible who were the prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, but also the women who were pagan women who prophesied things that they interpreted as being related to prophesying Christ, the Libyan Sibyl here, all around. So these are all, it all has to do with some program invented, for this event that was given to Michelangelo to put, all these figures. But every one of them is bold and has lots of volume, lots of energy, and they all express power. That is the main thing about Michelangelo's art, is that he used the human figure to express power, and so often they're nude, often they're very bulky and muscular, and they're all in sort of dynamic poses of twisting and turning and exerting themselves in some way. And he does this whether he's doing painting or sculpture. This is the creation of Adam. Let me point it out in the other picture. The creation of Adam is right here, close to the middle. Seeing it here isolated, so it's just the picture. This is a fresco. So, and this is like basically what the raw plaster looks like, unpainted. And you just have, it's very clear. You just have two figures. You have God the Father here creating, and Adam here, who's sort of in a languid pose, as if he hasn't received the spark of life yet. And the image of Adam is just like an academic drawing of the ideal figure, with exaggerated musculature and the lighting on it and the volume of it is showing off Michelangelo's understanding of anatomy, his understanding of what his ideal of a figure is, and the sort of latent power of the figure. Notice that God the Father is in this almost the same pose, except for this arm coming out this way. His leg and everything's also in the same pose. His knee isn't up like this one is, but where his knee would be is another figure. There's a kind of a piece of drapery that's sort of floating around God the Father here, and has a group of angels, or putti, which are like the little baby angels that are a way to sort of abbreviate the people who accompany God, the other spirits that are around. Even this one looks like an angel that is bearing everything up, like it's holding it up, like he's instead of flying himself or floating himself, he actually has weight, just like Adam does, but is um, and has to be borne up uh, in this world here. There's also a female figure here, which could be interpreted as Eve, that in the mind of God here is still before he's even while he's still making Adam, he's going to be making Eve later on, and so Eve is there waiting, hasn't been made yet. It's just this, like the spiritual world here, and this is the real world. But notice that having the same pose means that Adam is made in the image of God. Uh, in this case, literally. Um, wonderful image. I mean, it's very clear, and the reason is it's very simple and clear. It has hardly any setting going on like this. The landscape is just some green here and some other color here, and there's no indication of place or setting. And the reason is because this is seen from the floor. You don't get to nobody sees it this close up. It's seen. From a great distance, and so when you look up at it, any small details would not be seen. In fact, he learned this on his way. He started, I think, on this end, and he put pictures with lots of figures in it that are complex. And he realized once he moved his scaffolding over, seeing it from the floor, he says, "Hey, these are too small. These figures are too small to see easily." So he started making them with simpler compositions as he went along. I can show the some of the other figures. These are not on your list, so you don't have to identify them, but they're other to show you examples of the massive quality of his figures. The fact that they have visually lots of power, even when they're not nude, and when you can see when they're covered up with drapery, you can see that the figures have this mass to them. The light and the dark indicate the large volume, and they just feel like they're very strong. And they also have this dynamic twist to them, even though this is a man sitting holding a book. That twist in his figure, the crossing of the legs, and his pose and everything, all these things indicated he's in the middle of an action. His drapery is as if he turned over this way just so fast that his drapery is sort of fluttering in the breeze, and creating this nice sort of roundness to it to unify all of this. And then there's a couple of putti around. Let me show you something about. Look at this guy a little close up. This is something when I was pointing out the Botticelli's linearness, putting a black line around some things and filling it in with color. Michelangelo did that as well, especially in these background figures. It's hard to paint. It's hard to paint frescoes, and getting an image up onto a thing and getting it exactly on the right scale is very hard to do. And you have to make paper, what's called cartoon. Cartoon is just the Italian word for cartone, is a big piece of paper, and they would draw the thing onto the piece of paper and then bring it up here. And initially, they would put little holes in the paper along the edge. And they would pounce it. They would just have like a bag of charcoal, and pounce it so that the charcoal would go through the paper and through the little holes and make little lines, so you could tell where the edges of things are, so he could paint it to scale. But that was too slow for him, and instead he would just put the piece of paper up there and take a knife and cut it, and so there's an incision along the edge of things all the way around, so he could tell where he was going to put his marks. Another thing that's interesting is normally when you render a thing in volume and you want to show that something has volume, as you want to model it, have a light side and a dark side. One way to do this is for the dark side you add black to the paint, and for the light side you add white to the paint. Well, in some of the Florentine artists, as Michelangelo was taught as by Ghirlandaio, was to do instead have different hues for the light and the dark, and that's an interesting way of doing it, and it's a way to add color without diminishing the saturation of a color by adding black or white to it. You just use different hue. So that's what's going on with this arm here, with these different colors that are creating um, a hue contrast, so as to create volume that way. There's another example of it over here. There's also figures like this that are made to look like as if they're sculptural figures. They're little babies, or ignudi, or putti, as they're called, that are all in a variety of poses, but they're painted as if they're carved stone, while as other figures are painted as if they are um, um, human figures, but in the place of where stone figures would be. Okay, so let's look at his sculpture. This is the one of his first works that he did is that put him on the map. It's called the Pietà, which is Italian for pity. It's the image of Mary holding the dead body of Christ, and we saw one of these earlier, really early on in the 1300s, called the Vesperbild. The Germans, their take on this was completely different. It was a rather ugly thing, something where you can contemplate the sorrows of the Virgin and give a visceral, emotional response to. But the Italians, when they do something like this, and very few of them even did images of the Pietà, only Michelangelo that I can think of would do this, at least the Florentines. When they do it, it's much more classical. It's the emotional aspect is subdued to almost negligible qualities, where what is being shown here is the quiet contemplation of it, and the figure of Christ is completely undistorted. It's absolutely perfect in every way, and it is polished to such an extent that it looks like flesh, and it's like one of the reasons for it is because he was very young and he wanted to show off. He wanted a piece that was beyond anything that anyone had ever made before, and of course he succeeded. Here's what it looks like from above. It's a rather complex looking image. There's a full figure of an adult man, rendered very realistically and in idealized proportions, but in this sort of languid pose, similar to what Adam was in before in the painting. And then the figure of Mary, who's female and probably ought to be smaller than him, is actually larger. If you look at them from the front, if she were to stand up, she would be much taller than Christ. But I think the overall effect, though, is one of peace. It has this pyramid shape to it, where it is kind of small up here, big down here, so that it's a heavy base. It feels very stable, and this weight that comes from this sagging aspect of the figure of Christ is contained between these two massive kind of knees, and all of this drapery that is giving a stable base to it, and then the emotion that is being expressed is almost not there at all. Look at the face of Mary. It looks as peaceful as she can be. I mean, the carving around the veil here is so thin, light would shine through it. It's so thin. And it's just as delicate and peaceful and ideal and beautiful as it can be. And the only indication that she has any response is this gesture of her hand. She's inviting you to look gently. But if you look at the drapery is doing all sorts of interesting things. I mean, it's very agitated all around, and it's creating all these swirls and eddies and turbulence within a very stable outline. And that is where the emotional aspect comes from, this deep carving here, and this broad sweeps and other, bits of drapery stuff going around. That's where all the energy is coming from. Um, the image of Christ's face here comes from Verrocchio. Verrocchio did a statue of a bronze statue of Christ, and that in the middle of the 1400s, and that becomes the standard face of Christ from then on. This is the face that you think of as Christ, and that's where that comes from. Look at the agitation within the hair here, and all of this, where in contrast to the peacefulness of the face. Uh, after he did this, and it was delivered to the client, people, it was so good that people didn't believe that Michelangelo had done it, and so he snuck in one night and carved his name into it. So this is the sash, this sash here that's going across Mary's chest here, and it has his name. Michelangelo Buonarroti, Florentine, made this. FAC made this, and so he identified it, and his fame went all over the world because of this, and he got this commission afterward. This is to do the David. The David was is going to be like the Davids from before, in that it's an image of Florence, or that is an allegory, I guess, so you say, of Florence, but Florence that is much more confident, a Florence that is equal to the task of killing the giant. So this is a gigantic sized David, compared to the other two, which is the size, life size, boy size, like an adolescent boy size. This is about 16 feet tall. It's all carved from one block of stone. It is a block of stone that was lying in the churchyard for like 80 years, and it was quarried at the at the quarry. Is one of it's an unusually pure piece of stone, and it was very large. And they originally were going to carve a Hercules out of it. And the artist who started it, worked on it for a while and got it to some state. We don't know exactly what state it was in, but it was. He gave up. He says it was too much of a task, and it just sat there uncarved for a generation or two. And when it came time to somebody wanted, we need to do something with this, and they set up a committee and says, well, we'll give this to Michelangelo to carve, and because he'd done such a good job on the Pietà. And Michelangelo made this. It was originally supposed to go on top of the cathedral in one of the niches on the cathedral. So you look at it from the street, looking up from a steep angle. So it has some distortions that come from intending to be seen from a different angle. But once it was made and revealed to everyone, it was so stunning that they said, we've got to put this, in a more prominent place where you can see it up close. And it was decided to put it in the piazza in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, which a copy of it stands now. It stood there for hundreds of years until they realized it was going to deteriorate in the rain and pollution and stuff. So they put it indoors in the Accademia Museum, also in Florence. And that's where we see it here. Someone is cleaning it. But if you go to the piazza now, the copy is still there. It is a full-size standing figure in classical contrapposto. It is modeled almost exactly on the image from classical antiquity, like the spear bearer by Polyclitus, or one of those other ones. But similar proportions, similar type of figure, though in this case it is telling the Christian story of David and Goliath, and he has in his hand the sling his sling is here, and this hand goes around behind his back here, and he's being held in the other hand. Where are the other stones? And he's, in this case, he's not. It's not like the other two, where the other two Davids we saw, which were after the fact, after the killing of Goliath, but before, where he's just standing and looking at Goliath. He's sort of steeling himself for that, and as such, he's standing in such a way that, unlike the relaxed poses of classical antiquity, he looks kind of more like a coiled spring, like he could at any moment jump and spring into action. And that's a difference between this look that he has going compared to the antiquity. I mean, in some respects, if you compare this to any classical statue, especially the Greek ones from the classical period, those are relaxed. They're the ideal pose of just a male, nude male figure, the perfection of humanity, and as such they represent the ideal. And here he's taking that image almost exactly, except tweaking it a little bit. Making it just a little bit more. This turn of the head that he has is enough to, and that stare, the wrinkle of his brow indicates that he's not just standing relaxed. He is a warrior about to attack, and that is a thing where the Italians of his age are would look at this as seeing that he's surpassed what the Greeks had done. In his youth, he had made an image of, I think it was Bacchus, an image of Bacchus, which was mistaken for an actual classical piece. Something that he made because there were people who were digging up classical statues all the time and finding them and say, here's another one. And when he made this Bacchus, people thought, this is something from the antique, and so it was something that it augmented his reputation, that he could do something exactly like the antique. But here, it goes beyond it, in that he's made something that's even better. So let's look at the architecture for a moment. We had this on our list of things to describe. This is Bramante's Tempietto, and it's the idealized centrally planned church that people in the Renaissance like so much, though they didn't actually execute it very many times. Like the building in the background of the delivery of the keys that we saw, just a radially planned or centrally planned church. And this was a rare example, and it could be done because it's not really a church, it's just a marker of a spot. Some martyr had occurred here. I think Peter maybe was arrested on this spot or something, but it's just what the thinkers, the humanists of the period thought would make the ideal church. Here's a model of it. Well, Bramante here was asked to do St. Peter's. St. Peter's was a church we saw originally made in the 300s. Old St. Peter's was very old. It was many centuries old and was deteriorating, and they wanted to bring it up to date with this new architectural style that they have in the Renaissance. And originally, they gave Bramante the job, and Bramante said, "Okay, we'll make St. Peter's in a centrally planned church like this, only on a gigantic scale. This is much larger than the footprint of the original church, which was in itself was one of the biggest churches in the world." And so this is as Bramante had designed it. It was going to be, it was going to have towers here, and it was going to have other domes around it, sort of like Hagia Sophia, as we saw earlier in the Middle Ages. During its construction, the original church, part of the original church, was still here while they started building the vaults around it. And this, as you recognize, is something is similar to that School of Athens by Raphael. This was the state that it was in at the time that that was being painted. But these are the original walls of the original church that hadn't been torn down yet. But Bramante died, and Michelangelo got the job of finishing the church. And Michelangelo, this is a picture of what it looks like now, seen from the outside. It wasn't entirely finished, even within Michelangelo's lifetime. Later, another artist that we'll see later extends this part out so that it becomes a longitudinal church rather than a centrally planned church, and it becomes a much more Baroque. That is, we'll see the Baroque and all of its qualities later. But for now, we can see, if you look at it from this angle, you can see pretty much what the Renaissance architecture would look like. Michelangelo's architecture is it's kind of like his sculpture. It's bold and powerful. It has lots of opportunities for light and shadow by having deeply carved bits and making things so that some things project out, some things are recede in deeply, so that light and dark can play over the surface, similar to the way he does his sculpture. He uses the kind of sculpture originally designed by Brunelleschi. That is a sort of a composite version of someone who has studied classical architecture. Has gone to Rome and drawn all of the buildings and taken it in and created some sort of new version of what architecture should be if it were going to be kind of a new version or classical architecture 2.0. And so he's taken that and moved it further, given the fact that he's doing a building that is, larger than any other building that anyone has created so far. And so he has this giant order of like pilasters here to create, going over 2 different stories. He has these windows with lots of carvings, so deep carvings in and out to create all these lights and shadows. He has drawings of these things where he's, when he's drawing, he's not using a compass and straight edge in order to do some sort of intellectual composition, the way other architects would and did. But he uses charcoal, and he draws all of these features the way he would draw a figure, with lots of bold pentimenti and lines and light and dark and changing from one shape to another, and to arrive at some sort of pleasing composition. He also did the dome. The dome is magnificent, and he was humble about it. He thought that he could make a dome as large as or larger than Brunelleschi's dome, but he couldn't make one more beautiful, because Brunelleschi's dome is about as good as you can get in terms of what the feeling that you have looking at it. It just feels like it's rising. But Michelangelo has his own version of it. It's also a dome it's not hemispherical, but it's a little taller, so it kind of looks like egg shaped, with these ribs coming down here, and a sequence of double columns with a architrave that goes in and out, similar to the one that goes in and out in his painting in the Sistine Chapel. Little bits around here. He made a giant wooden model of it first, and then that model, I think, is still in the Vatican, and shows the how what they used to base this on. I think it was the actual building of the dome occurred after his lifetime, so he didn't get to supervise that. Here's what it looks like on the inside. It's a magnificent thing, though. Much of the details of the decoration stuff are from the Baroque time, so it's a little over the top and excessive compared to what it would have been had it been done as a Renaissance building. But you can kind of see Renaissance architecture going on here with the alternating triangular and arched pediments going around. And this pleasing proportional relationship that you see right here is much more of a Renaissance thing, whereas when you get up to here with all this stuff everywhere, that's a Baroque thing. We'll get into that later. The inside is enormous. It's a gigantic church, something on the even greater than the like the baths that the Romans had, like the baths of Caracalla or something, where there's great big barrel vaults and huge piers like this. It is such a scale that when you're there and you're standing on the floor and you're looking up at these shapes, that you can't even see and conceive of how big things are, because there's nothing up there to tell you. But if this is something that's in the middle of the building. This is the baldacchino over the crossing, and this is 100 feet tall. This is as tall as a 10-story building. So it is just completely dwarfed by Michelangelo's building. So it's very impressive. It's the biggest church in the world. Lots and lots of stone, and as you see, the kind of decoration that you see all over everything is from a later generation, from a later style. This is Baroque. The baldacchino is Baroque, but the shape that we're seeing is very classical and is a Renaissance design, and Bramante is responsible for some of it, and Michelangelo is responsible for the rest. All right, so that's enough for this time.